Hello and welcome to Mac Power Users. My name is Stephen Hackett, and I'm joined by my friend and yours, Mr. David Sparks.
Hey, Stephen, how are you today?
I'm good, David. How are you?
I had vacation this year. I was thinking about you because we were in the state of Hawaii, the lovely state of Hawaii. Did you know that like every other car in Hawaii is a Toyota Tacoma?
Yeah, it's heaven on earth. That's what it sounds like to me.
The whole time we were just counting them driving down. I'm like, Mr. Hackett would be so happy if he was here. He would be among family.
That's right.
Ohana, as they say. Yeah, you got to get out there sometime. It's great. But back in the saddle here with the old Mac Power Users. Today, before we get started, I was a guest on the Paper Places podcast.
Yeah. This is a podcast on Relay, hosted by Carrie Provenzano, our chief advertising officer. Carrie's also a writer, and she has this great show talking to people about the writing process. And your interview was great. It was so good.
It was really fun. I didn't know what to expect, but Carrie is really good at it. And I talk about blending analog and digital tools in my writing system. And it was kind of a workflow that I'd never really discussed before. So go check it out. We'll put a link in the show notes.
And today on More Power Users, which is the longer ad-free version of the show, we're going to be talking with our guest, Ken Case, about managing software products across technological transitions. So Ken has been in, as we're going to talk about in just a second, Ken has been in this game for a long time and has seen a lot of things come and go. And we just want to talk about how you approach those things and maybe some fun stories of transitions gone past. So members, look for that at the end of the show. And if you're not a member, there's a link in the show notes to join. You get longer ad-free versions of the show and a bunch of extra goodies. We'd love to have your support.
Yeah. A constant throughout the run of Mac Power Users has been the Omni Group. I've always said that they're one of the premier software houses outside of Apple, making software for Apple ecosystem. And welcome to the show, Ken Case. I guess is your role CEO? I mean, I know you run the shop over there. I don't know what your actual title is, though.
Yes, CEO.
Okay.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and Ken, we've had you on the show with some of the software developer roundtables in the past you've been on, but in 800 episodes, you've never been a guest on the show. So when you and I were talking recently about it, I was really excited to have you on because I think you've got a real interesting story that we'd like to share with the audience. So thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you. Looking forward to it.
Ken, tell us about your education, how you got started in this racket.
Sure. Well, let's see. How far back do I go? When I first got exposed to computers, I guess, when I was not even a teenager yet. And my mom was taking some classes at the University of Washington. And one of the classes was about, she was working on, I think she was maybe working towards her master. No, she was probably working towards her doctorate at that point in education and education administration. And one of her classes was about using this cyber mainframe and going in and learning how to use punch cards and submit these cards and get back output on printers. And I'd been fascinated by computers for years before that, reading about them in encyclopedias and things, but I hadn't had the opportunity to use one in person until I kind of went along with her to her class and listened along as all these adults were learning how to use punch cards, and then I kind of helped my mom, do that stuff. And so it was a fun way to start to use a computer. But of course, at that time, every job that you submitted to this mainframe, you were being charged. They had some very precise accounting. And so at the end of every printout, it would say, here's how much money you spent to accomplish this goal. And it wasn't something then that I would have any access to after the end of that quarter. So my real start with computers, I guess, came with the Apple II when it showed up at my, what grade was I in at that time? I guess I was in 6th grade, and or between 6th grade and 7th grade. And the Apple II arrived, and I got a chance to take home all of the manuals for the summer because nobody else was that interested in them, and read through it all, and then came back and try to use, help other people as much as I could and so on. And of course, what they realized was that with one computer at an entire school, that meant each student maybe got half an hour every few weeks. It was not a big school, obviously, but still, it was one computer to go around among a lot of students. So my parents took pity on me, and we couldn't afford an Apple II, so we got an Atari 800, which turned out to be a great little machine.
Wow, Ken, you are just pushing so many buttons with me, because I think you and I are about the same age, and that was me, that age where the home computer was a new thing. I remember there was the Atari 400 that had the world's worst keyboard ever shipped. If anybody's listening to this, I think I've mentioned this on the show in 800 episodes. I'm not sure I could ever avoid it, but I had a 400 at one point, and you had to have a pencil that you would just like press really hard on this capacitive. It wasn't even capacitive. I don't know what it was.
Membrane mushiness. Yeah.
It was safe to spill water on, though, right?
Yeah, apparently. But it really wasn't, because it would get in around the edges.
That's true.
But the Atari 800 was the superior Atari, and it actually, you could put cartridges in it. That was the actual computer. But it was the one for all of us that couldn't afford the Apple. And it was but having started at that phase, I'm sure it gives you a perspective on the industry, because you have been there for the whole run of the personal computer. I mean, you were there at the beginning, and just look where we are now. It's just so amazing.
Yeah, well, it's incredible. I think how much things have moved over the decades. Of course, I recently shared, I think on Mastodon, that my 1980s were sort of bookended by that Atari 800 on the early end and the NeXT computer on the late end. And so, in between, I went to the University of Washington, and there I learned, I started using VAX computers, and I got to use some of that Cyber some more, the one with the punch cards, but interactively. And then, of course, a bunch of Unix machines, lots of Unix machines. There were so many different variations that were happening at that time as we had kind of an explosion of professional workstation vendors with Sun Computers, and Digital was making some of their own, and Apollo and Silicon Graphics and so on. And I kind of got caught up in all of that as a systems manager and system administrator for the University of Washington, and then became a systems programmer. And then I, as a systems programmer there, they got this lab donated by NeXT. I'm not sure if it was donated or if NeXT actually managed to persuade them to pay for it, but whatever. It showed up at the computer lab there, and they didn't really know what to do with it. They started treating it a lot like they were treating their PCs, where you would walk up to a NeXT and you would bring your own media that had all of your files on it, and you would sit down at it and you'd start, doing your work. And then when you leave as a student, you would make sure you saved everything back to your media and take it with you. Well, the media at that time on the PC was, a floppy disk, which didn't hold very much. But wasn't that expensive either. The media on these NeXT computers were these, we called them floptical disks. They were optical sort of cartridges that could hold an awful lot of data at the time. And now I'm trying to think what that was. What was it? Maybe 100 megabytes or something. Like it seemed crazy, right? It seemed as big as many hard drives were at that time. Maybe it's 256 megabytes now that I think about it. And so people would bring these in and out if they could afford them, but that was pretty expensive for a student just to have one of these cartridges. And as a Unix sysadmin at that point, I'm like, well, that's not the right way for us to be treating these Unix machines. Let's go ahead and just NFS mount these, the big drives from the server mainframes that we had behind the scenes, and the NeXT can all, you serve the files that way. You can log into it. You can log into it with your own username and password, and it'll have everything there for you and be good to go. So that was kind of my first introduction to the NeXT system.
That was great because, NeXT did not have a huge stable of developers, and you were getting experience on it from the get-go.
Yeah, this was next step 0.7, I think, at that time. um, which, the university had a history of being involved pretty early on these things. Like I remember going to the introduction of in January of 1984 of the Macintosh and it showing up there. And then the university had a few Inside Mac volumes that we could read through and learn about. Again, the Mac was too expensive for me, so I never got one at home. But I remember certainly salivating over them at the local computer shops. And when the university got some in a lab that I was helping manage, then we played some Maze Wars or whatever. But
I had tons of exposure to Macs in those early days because my university had gone all in with the Macs. And like you said, you'd have a lab and you'd bring a pocket full of floppy disks and off you go. But the NeXT was a mystery computer to me. There were none of them available to me anywhere.
Right.
And I just knew it was some magical device that was like better than anything out there, but also unobtainable for me,
Right.
So I never really got into it, but you were lucky to have that exposure, right? Because you eventually got into the business of making software for NeXT.
Right. Yeah. So this led, the way I kind of viewed the NeXT at the time was, well, the tagline for the Mac around that era was the computer for the rest of us.
Yeah.
And for me, the sort of unofficial tagline in my head for the NeXT was the computer for the other rest of us. The ones who wanted the Unix underpinnings and wanted to be able to program it and have all of that level of power and control that I was used to from being a programmer on a Unix system, but also have this great, easy to use interface and look and feel and windows that you could drag around and move live and, resize and live and so on. It's not like Windows were unique to Unix. We already had X Windows on Sun workstations and digital workstations and so on. But having a really polished user experience on a Unix machine, that was... well, maybe Silicon Graphics could also fall into that camp, but it was not nearly as user-friendly as the NeXT was, or as a Mac was.
Yeah. What the NeXT? I mean, as I think about it, to this day, I've never sat in front of a NeXT computer. Stephen, have you got one in your collection? It seems to me like that would be natural.
Yeah, I've got several, and it's amazing, especially later versions of NeXTSTEP and then OpenStep. It's amazing how many of the ideas from that became Mac OS X because, Apple bought NeXT because Apple had failed multiple times to build a true next generation operating system. And, the Venn diagram of like what they took from the classic Mac OS and what they took from NeXT to like put into Mac OS X, there's a lot of NeXT stuff in there. Obviously, there's the whole technology stack of being on top of Unix, like what Ken is saying, and the Objective-C and object-oriented programming, but also just like some of the interface ideas and the way that their file manager worked and the way Finder worked. Like it's like kind of, it is not Mac OS X. It doesn't feel like Mac OS X, but it feels like its Bizarro cousin. And
right.
It's, it's really pretty remarkable for a company that ultimately did fail, how many good ideas happened at NeXT and how a lot of those ideas are still with us today. It's really, the legacy of NeXT is really pretty mind-blowing, I think.
Yeah, they had a poster there at the beginning of the 90s saying something like, over the next 10 years, there will only be, 10 really interesting advancements, and here are 8 of them. That was their bragging posters, claiming, well, we've got this great storage, the magnetic optical drive. We have DSP on there, so sort of this coprocessor that could produce much higher quality sound. We have rich text, sort of. Anyway, the poster went through all of these sort of factors. And I don't know that all of those were really the strongest advancements of the decade, but certainly they laid a lot of groundwork for some of the things that were by far the biggest. I think the biggest advancement of the decade was the introduction of the web, and of course that started on the NeXT platform.
Mm-hmm.
And they did, of course, have a very enthusiastic CEO at the time. So
Yes.
I can believe those
They did.
posters. At what point can you go from being the university NeXT network administrator to software developer?
Sure. So at the university, I mean, my actual job there was to be a systems programmer for a bunch of their Unix systems, and so I was writing software. One of the bits of software actually I used for many decades afterward. It was like a bulletin board program that we used to communicate among the students there at the university, which at the time the university I think had about 40,000 undergrad students. It's a big university, still is. And so that was kind of the project that introduced me to really working with Will Shipley, who was one of the other co-founders there at the Omni Group. And together then we were also kind of working on this game. So for those who don't know, I also have this background in just enjoying games, all the way from, of course, arcade games and games on the Atari 800. Through the 80s, there were a bunch of games that you would play on VAX systems and Unix systems, things like Conquest or whatever. And then moving forward, then we were looking at, well, can we do something a little more interesting using the NeXT platform? Do some graphics based game that maybe is multi-user, and we never got super far on it. I'll say that right up front. But the game was called Omni, and that's part of the reason we ended up calling ourselves the Omni Group. And that's where those of us who founded the company met. We're kind of like having dinners at the end of a day and talking about how we were going to build this game and how it might work, and building prototypes of various pieces and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
So this is also at the time that my sister's D&D group had from college had started working on building their own company doing games. And their games, though, were not at all on the computer. They were all, it came from a D&D group. So the first game stuff that they were writing were books about how do you manage really advanced D&D class characters as they get up with this book called The Primal Order. And then someone approached them about, well, I would love to publish a board game that involves like moving robots around a moving board, and would you guys be interested in doing that? And they're like, well, that sounds like a lot of money for us to make all these miniature pieces and everything, but can you come up with a simpler game that is, that we could just do with paper and printing stuff on paper? We know how to print books. We know how to print paper. We can maybe figure out how to print like a card game or something. And so that was when that group ended up creating Magic the Gathering. And because I was kind of their tech friend, one of their tech friends. I mean, one of the other founders was also certainly into computers and games at that time. But I ended up being the person who registered wizards.com for them on the same day that I registered omnigroup.com. So,
wow. Wow.
So, as long as I was sending in the form, like, oh, I might as well register one for us too. And then we started helping them by hosting their mailing list for their distributors and play testers and so on. So that was one of our first early founding clients, I guess you would say, of the Omni Group, was Wizards of the Coast. And we also helped them print out the prototype playtesting decks for like the first printouts of Magic before they actually had real artwork. So we were taking artwork out of the dictionary that was on the NeXT. If you opened up Webster's dictionary, which is bundled with the NeXT, you could go look up certain words and you would see a little line art illustration of that thing. And so for our playtesting purposes, we're like, well, here's some easy art we can kind of put in for planes. Here's a picture of an airplane, and so on. Even though planes, in that case, in Magic, was like supposed to be a land that you're drawing your mana from.
Sure.
But yeah, it was. So that was one of our big projects. Another one of our big projects at the time was working with the big vendor. It was sort of the Adobe of the NeXT software world, which is called Lighthouse Design. Lighthouse, was a relatively small company. They had maybe 5 people or something, so not nearly Adobe size. But of course, NeXT was not nearly Apple size either. In this smaller ecosystem, this was one of the bigger software vendors, and they were working on a suite of productivity apps to do diagramming, to do presentations, outlines, things like that. So we started helping them build their software. So that was our second big sort of initial client in our consulting business as we started this company. And then the third was NeXT themselves. They had a project where they had sold a whole bunch of workstations to the William Morris talent agency in Los Angeles. And William Morris had been, one of the biggest talent agencies in town for much of the 1900s. But in the 1980s, they had not really kept up with the computer revolution. They didn't put PCs on people's desks. And so when they got to the end of the 1980s, they were realizing that all their competitors were ahead in terms of keeping track of what projects everybody was working on, what their bookings were, who the talents were, what their contact information was, and so on, because they were still just using pen and paper for everything. And so they realized they needed to catch up. They kind of did a survey. They thought, oh, well, we have lots of money, and this NeXT computer thing, it's expensive, but it looks like it's really great. Let's get one on every agent's desk. And so they had, like a $10 million contract to outfit the whole company with NeXT. And part of that contract was supposed to be, Steve had sold them on having custom software built for their company that would help manage everything sort of end to end in their business. And so we ended up working on that project. And that was our third big project as we started the company.
Did you bump into Steve Jobs back in the day? Were you in that orbit at that point?
I think I bumped into him at Next World, at Next Step Expo, at the various things, but not really. I don't know that he knew who I was until we wrote OmniWeb.
Yeah.
So that was, a little bit later. We wrote the web browser that everybody ended up using if they were on the NeXT platform. And I know he used that one for many years. And certainly we were at that point.
It was such a small world back then.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, then NeXT itself, though it had some great technology, some great foundations for building a platform, it was too late to the game. It was not really making headway against Windows and the Macintosh. And so first their hardware business failed, and then it looked like their operating system platform, they had ported their operating system before giving up on the hardware off to Intel processors, so you could, in theory, run it on a generic PC. It had to be kind of a high-end PC, but a PC nonetheless. Or you could run it on, they partnered with HP NeXT to bring it to HP's line of workstations, as well as to like their Intel Performa systems, but their PA RISC systems. And they also partnered with Sun to bring it to Spark stations. But even, all of those things are happening right as the web is starting to take off. Sun now gets a whole bunch of business as the company that is hosting a lot of the web servers that are out there, and starts to get into this world of Java programming stuff specifically for the web. And they decide they're not really all that interested in OpenStep anymore. So they ended up acquiring Lighthouse Design, that sort of Adobe of the NeXT world that I mentioned earlier. And because they wanted to have this whole suite of OpenStep software that would now run on their Spark stations, as they started to have OpenStep on their Spark stations. Except then they shift directions and decide we're just going to do Java everywhere. So Lighthouse, can you port your stuff to Java instead? And of course, as I mentioned, we were already working with Lighthouse at that time. So we started now working, with the same team as they're now part of Sun, and helped them build pieces of, like the Swing object library, building a rich text suite for for this new Java language and environment, and then trying to help them port these serious productivity apps from the NeXT to this Java environment that we're making. And it's going okay, but we're not super excited about it, but it's better than having all of that technology go nowhere. Meanwhile, Steve Jobs has sort of lost interest. He's getting distracted with the success of Pixar, and his attention is now shifted over there, and he's not really, worried about his failing NeXT company. And so that's sort of where we are at the end of 96, when then we get the news that Apple is buying NeXT. And as soon as we do that, we all celebrate. And how soon can we get out of this Java work and get back to doing programming in Objective-C with AppKit?
Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, at so many turns, history could have gone differently. But here you are today, and you're working on the Apple platform, and almost 30 years after that acquisition. And that was not a safe bet to make 30 years ago, no. Right? I mean, the reason that people are looking at Java and other things is because the Mac isn't a viable platform in the late 90s. And they somehow pull this trick out of their hat of purchasing NeXT and rolling into Mac OS 10. And here we all are, years later. Mac OS 10 is now getting ready to be 25 years old in the spring. And it's just, I mean, what your timing coming into this industry and your choices and what platforms you were interested in and what y'all were going to work on. I'm sure at many points people may have looked over your shoulder and be like, what are you doing, man? Like, why are you dealing with NeXT and these other things? But in many ways, you've got the last laugh, because that technology is what so much of our world is based on today.
Yeah, we always had, we knew it was a long shot, I guess you could say that. It was a long shot that had a future that we really wanted to believe in, because when, I remember making this choice at the beginning of the 90s of, well, do I want to invest my time working on this NeXT platform that has so few, there's so few NeXT cubes out there compared to any other platform, basically, that I could choose. And I had spent, the previous 5 years or so working on trying to create software for Unix systems that would run on as many Unix machines as possible, right? I was trying to be completely portable and have as broad an audience as possible. I guess if I were really trying to go for the broad market, I would have gone for Windows instead. But yeah, so thinking about that choice, I thought, well, I could either spend, let's say, a month of effort designing this thing for Unix and cross-platform Unix and doing all this sort of extra work to reach a particular level of quality. Or I could spend on the next platform, as I learned AppKit and learned Objective-C and saw how much more productive it made me. I could spend maybe a tenth of that amount of time and just get a lot more done and have a much more rich product at the end that sure won't sell it to as many people, but it's still going to be a much more interesting product that I can feel more proud about. And so I decided, well, let's see if we can go that route, and the one that makes us more efficient, and then do what we can to help that platform succeed. And so that was sort of how we viewed our mission for most of the 90s was, okay, what can we do now to help NeXT succeed? Oh, okay, you've got another reference customer over here at Macaw Cellular that became AT&T Wireless. How can we help them, utilize your technology better, and so on.
And the thing was, it was just so substantively better that, like, I'm sure part of you just wanted to be playing in that sandbox.
Yeah, it was more fun. Nothing else. Yeah, so it's been a pretty fun ride through all of these decades, for sure.
Yeah. So a game idea becomes a Mac productivity software company eventually.
Though along the way, we did do a lot of game work, to be fair. Like in the 90s, we helped John Carmack, who had he was building NeXT and then he was building Doom and then Quake on the NeXT platform. So when we, realized what he was doing, and he was having trouble like getting the frame rate up on the NeXT itself. Like he could get it faster on the PC, and he was kind of okay with that for the most part. So I helped him by sharing, here's how you can use the interceptor library that's built into the NeXT. It's not publicly documented. There aren't any public headers, but here's some headers that I can build for you, and here's how you would link to this private thing. And so we got Doom and then Quake kind of running with acceptable frame rates there on the NeXT, which then led to us having this relationship with id Software, where as Apple acquires NeXT, and they're looking at the Rhapsody strategy. And one of the concerns at that time was, well, what about all of these games that are used to taking over your whole machine? And how can you really do a performance-sensitive game on a Unix platform? This hadn't really been proven yet. So we ended up porting Quake over to what became macOS 10 server, and then several Quake-derived games. And I think, in the end, we probably helped bring 40 commercial games to the Mac platform, to macOS 10, by about 2003 or so.
This episode of Mac Power Users is made possible by 1Password. You probably saw in the news a couple of weeks ago that some 16 billion, with a B, 16 billion login credentials were leaked online. Services like Apple, Google, Facebook, and more potentially caught up in this. That's a lot of passwords. That's a lot of logins. Now, most of this data is from older breaches, which is good, but it serves as a good reminder of the persistent risks that just are inherent in our digital lives, that we have usernames and passwords for lots of things. And if you're reusing passwords, or you're using weak passwords, if you're not using two-factor authentication, your accounts are vulnerable. And that's where our sponsor 1Password comes in. 1Password makes it really easy to manage all of these logins. We all have so many, and it's easy. It's tempting to reuse the same password or to come up with something really easy to guess. But you need them to be strong and unique. And 1Password gives you the tools not only to create and manage those passwords, but then to actually use them. Because 1Password integrates with all modern browsers. It's on iOS, iPadOS, it's on Windows, it is on the web. So wherever you are, wherever you're getting your work done, you can log into your accounts safely and securely. But you can store so much in 1Password. I also use it to store my software licenses and driver's license information. The secure notes feature is really great as well, where you can basically have just free-form information within 1Password, protected by 1Password's great encryption. They have plans for individuals, businesses, and families, so go check it out. You want to go to 1password.com/MPU to learn more, and there you can sign up for a free 30-day trial. And when you do, again, you'll get 20% off. That's 1password.com/MPU.
All right, Ken, fast forwarding to today, you are now a successful Mac developer with the Omni Group and some of your amazing software, which I have a lot more context for now. What are you driving? What kind of Apple gear is on your desk these days?
Oh, sure. So on my desktop right here, I have Mac Studio that's somewhat aging. It's an M1 Mac Studio.
Okay.
That's not actually my primary machine. That's sitting underneath what is now my primary machine, an M4 Mac Mini, an M4 Pro, whatever that model is called. Basically, the maxed out Mac Mini.
That's an interesting decision. I mean, you run a software company. Obviously, you could justify going to the latest and greatest and most powerful Mac Studio, but you chose Mac Mini.
Yeah, well, it's a great little machine, especially for the, for what it does. And then I guess I hit this decision about, well, do I want the M3 Studio or the M4 Studio when the M4 Studio can't have as much RAM as the M3 Studio? And maybe I'll just sit it out and go for the M5 Studio when that comes. But
you're a desktop guy, so you want a desktop Mac.
I want, so I also have and use a maxed out Mac Pro M4.
Okay.
And
MacBook Pro,
and so that's actually the fastest of all my systems, right? Because that one has more memory than the Mini here, and it's an M4. but most of the time, yes, I live on my desktop, not with a laptop. And why is that? I guess just because I my work patterns and I tend to sit at a desk, and in theory I could plug in the laptop here, but really I like to have the laptop available for taking with me on the go, or using elsewhere in the house. When I do that, I'll often use it with my Apple Vision Pro, and so I'll use that as the screen, and I'll pair that up with the laptop.
How often do you use the Vision Pro?
I would say about 5 times a week. So
Okay.
most weekdays.
What's your
Usually in the
workflows
evening.
with it? What are the things you do with it?
So I mostly use my Mac with it. I guess there are 2 different types of activities that I'll do on it, right? I'll have work time on it where I'm using my Mac, and again, my MacBook, and using it as the screen. And then I will also sometimes, I haven't actually been using it too much recently for entertainment, but there was a time there where, like when I was watching Severance, I like to watch Severance. My older daughter likes to watch Severance. But my older daughter has now left the household as she moved out on her own a few years ago, and so we would compare notes, but I was watching Severance on my own, not with other people in the house, and so. Whenever you're watching media on your own, then that's actually, I think, a great opportunity to be using the Apple Vision Pro to watch the stuff, because you can have your giant screen, you have your good quality sound, and you can be side by side with somebody else on the couch and not distract or disturb them at all. They can be doing their own thing. And so,
Yeah, I totally
so we
agree.
kind of do a lot of parallel play, we call it, where we'll be sitting next to each other in the same room, and you can have that companionship, but be doing, maybe watching your own thing or doing your own thing.
Now, when you say you do work on it, are you like writing code in there using the virtual display? I mean, what type of work do you do in there?
Yeah, so I'll use the Mac. I don't even, I remember the gesture. I don't remember the name of the feature, but the Mac desktop remote display thing where you flip your hand over and then you go select from the, okay, I want to, connect to my laptop screen, and then you can put it in wide mode or ultra wide mode, and I usually do wide mode. I don't need that big a screen where I'm turning my head back and forth. I'd rather move windows around than move my head around, I guess.
Yeah.
And then yeah, I'll just be using Xcode and Terminal and all of the things that I normally use when I'm at a desktop.
And what I'll say for folks listening is that Ken is not merely an administrative CEO. Having been on Omni betas for probably over a decade now, I often see commits from Ken Case at like 2 a.m. where something's getting fixed. It's like this guy has got his hands in the code too. He's not just at the top.
Well, it's definitely the part of, that's one of the things I love about computers is getting in there and getting into the code.
What do you do with the iPad?
So right now, ever since actually we started working remotely from home during the pandemic, the iPad sits on my desk for the most part, right next to my Mac screen. So, I've got my Mac screen straight ahead of me, and then I've got the iPad sitting on the desk to the right, propped up at an angle. And I use that for all of my video conferencing. And then I'll switch back and forth between doing that, or, sometimes I'll have Omni Focus on there. It's just kind of a dashboard that keeps me focused on, okay, what's on today's forecast or whatever.
Yeah, the device is so good for an accessory to a Mac in that way. I talk about it like your utility screen. And I often, talk to people in Mac Sparky Labs and listeners of the show who have an iPad in a drawer they're not using, and I tell just get it out and plug it in and put it next to your Mac. You'd just be shocked how often you find use for it. It's also great, like for background, like if you just want to have some YouTube noise on, but keep your full screen and you find all these great little uses for it, and Apple's done such a good job of giving you ways to turn it into a second monitor or just use your keyboard on the iPad operating system. It's got really easy to do that.
Yeah, I used to use it a lot more when we were working in office and in person as something I would carry around with me to meetings and take notes on and so on. But since I'm usually at my desk now and the meetings, come to me at the desk, then I still use it a lot for meetings. It's just that now it's not where I take the notes. It's where I see the other people in the meeting, and then I can take the notes on the keyboard on my Mac.
Ken, I'd love to hear a bit about sort of the state of the Omni Group. Y'all have a whole suite of productivity applications, not only for the Mac, but across a bunch of Apple platforms. Tell us a little bit about those apps, how you prioritize them, how you think about them. Y'all do this incredible thing. I look forward to it every year. Y'all lay out this big roadmap blog post where you talk about, you go through the applications, you go through your plans for them. I assume that takes a lot of planning as well. So I'd love to hear how you approach those things.
Sure. Yeah. In fact, you're catching me right in roadmap season and our post WWDC update. So I'm working on that right now as it happens. I mean, not this instant now, but this week. Sure. So of course, the apps that we make are OmniFocus, our personal productivity, keeping track of what you're trying to get done tool. OmniGraffle, which is our diagramming app, which has a lot of history related to Lighthouse Design, that company I mentioned earlier. Their first big product was their diagramming app called Diagram on the NeXT platform. And the person who created Diagram, after he finished his 5 years at Sun from that acquisition, came over and worked with us to start OmniGraffle. And so it's a very kind of direct bit of history there. And then we have Omni Outliner. That one has some roots in being something that I started a little tool to help keep my wife keep track of the books that we had around our house, and then it kind of grew into more than that. I'd been using outlining apps in some form or another, from modes in Emacs to wherever, since I guess the mid '80s, and just always wanted a great outlining tool. And I had been kind of cheating and using Concurrence, which is Lighthouse's presentation app, sort of like Keynote, the predecessor to Keynote, for just in its outlining mode as my outliner back when we were on the OpenStep platform, the NeXT platform. But that, of course, didn't make its way over to the Mac, and so I decided we needed a good outliner there. And then OmniPlan is our fourth product, and that one is our project management for like professional project managers, where they have a team that they're trying to schedule and figure out what pieces of something will be available when, what the dependencies are between the tasks, what schedules different resources have, and then just trying to lay out everything in a sort of traditional Gantt chart or a PERT chart, and then work with it from there. And that one also has some sort of family history, because that was very much associated with the work my dad used to do when he worked for Boeing. He's helped schedule the Saturn V first stage in the 60s. So, wow. And then went on to work on the scheduling 747, over and over again, as every plane was sort of unique and came off the line.
Yeah, if you listen to your show, often some little topic will come up that pulls me entirely off the outline of the show and into left field. When you just said your dad worked on, the Saturn booster, now I realize I need to hold Steven in, because I know exactly what he wants to do. He wants to spend 3 hours talking to you about your dad.
Yeah, that is really cool. We can't do it. I will stay focused. We already talked about next step. Okay, we gotta.
Right.
I can only do so much.
So those apps, of course, they all kind of started on the Mac before Apple had other platforms that were. They had the iPod, but it wasn't really a good target for any of these apps. And then the iPhone came out, and so the day that the App Store launched, we had OmniFocus ready for it, which is actually before it launched. Even we won our Apple did the Apple Design Awards for that year, and they gave that sort of technology preview award for the iPhone to OmniFocus. So on the launch weekend, we had a really amazing launch where it was one of the, I think it was up to the second top grossing app for most of that weekend. And it was our 5th Apple Design Award, so we were pretty proud of that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, if I go back and look at, you look at your purchases historically, I think OmniFocus was the first app I bought for the iPhone.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
That was our only app that we brought to the iPhone at first because the others felt like they needed a bigger screen. When the iPad launched, then we also we had as launch titles Omni Graphel and Omni Graph Sketcher,
Mhm.
and then we worked towards bringing Omni Focus, Omni Outliner, and Omni Plan over, and that was its own long transition. And we've probably talked about that on the show before in some context.
Well, it's interesting to me. Every one of your apps started life to scratch your own itch, and people always say those are the best pieces of software, but I never realized it wasn't that you were identifying a market. It's like, no, my wife needed to track her book, so I made an outliner, and that turned into Omni Outliner. I like that.
Yeah, it certainly gives you more motivation, I think, and understanding of at least some of your customer base. Now, of course, as we started digging into OmniFocus, we've tapped into a very passionate customer base that have lots of different ways that they want to use the app. So it's not all about just how I use the app anymore, in terms of what features are in there and so on. But it makes for a good grounding, I think, and a good place to start for what you're doing.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com/MPU to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code MPU. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform designed to help you stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or scaling your business, Squarespace gives you everything you need to claim your domain, showcase your offerings with a professional website, grow your brand, and get paid all in one place. If you do your own thing, you need a website. And I'm sure that you've got some hesitation for that because it's always a little precarious. Who do you hire to help you? What service do you trust? What's involved with maintenance of it? All of that stuff leads to the delay of you setting up your website, which we all agree you really need, whatever it is you're making. Squarespace takes care of all of that stuff. I've been using them since they first opened. I love that they just make it so simple to build your own website and maintain your presence on the internet with the minimum of work and effort. Building your website is easy with Squarespace. They have this service called Blueprint AI, Squarespace's AI-enhanced website builder. It lets you quickly and easily build a site bespoke to your business. Just input some basic information about your industry and goals. Plus, we already know and we love Squarespace for their professionally designed and award-winning website templates. Just fire up Blueprint AI, you're off to the races. Before you know it, you've got a really beautiful website with no experience required. And if you need to get paid for your services, you can do that as well. From consultation to events and experiences, you can showcase your offerings with a customizable website designed to attract clients and grow your business. Think built-in appointment scheduling, email marketing tools, and more. Plus, keep everything cohesive with on-brand invoices and get paid easily with online payments. When I was running my law practice, it was a Squarespace website. People loved it. My lawyer friends asked me who I hired to build it, and it was all done with Squarespace using their built-in tools. It's just not that hard to make a great website. Those friction points we were talking about earlier, they're gone with Squarespace. Just go over to squarespace.com/MPU for your free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the code MPU to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That URL one more time is squarespace.com/MPU with the offer code MPU to get that 10% off your first purchase and to show your support for the Mac Power Users. And our thanks to Squarespace for their support of the Mac Power Users and all of Relay.
So we're recording this just a few weeks after WWDC, and Ken, you've lived through a lot of these, and I'm sure there have been years that the keynote and the State of the Union wrap up, and you look around and and realize your plans for the rest of the year have been set on fire and thrown out the window. But before we get to that and what y'all are doing this year, generally, how do y'all prepare for WWDC? What does the run up to that look like for the Omni Group? And then how do you decide each year on where to focus?
Sure. So WWDC is certainly the biggest sort of unknown in our calendar year every year. It's, we're going to learn from Apple whatever their teams, and they have a lot of teams, have been doing for the past year to advance the platforms that all of our apps use. So that's a pretty natural expectation that whatever's going to be news there is going to be big news for us as a company that is completely built around building apps for Apple platforms. So as a result, we think about, through the year, we think about what can we get done before WWDC? What are the things we really want to get done before WWDC? What are the things that we would love to get done, but it's okay if maybe it slips till later? And then what are the things that we know we should just plan to wait and see what happens at WWDC, and then make plans afterwards to figure out where we're going from there. That's kind of, I guess, the three categories of plans that we end up making. And sometimes we end up in a bit of a race because we're trying to get something done before WWDC. It's a big project. We've been working on some of these apps now for over 2 decades, and so none of them are small projects at this point. They're all things that we have invested a lot of time in, and that when we make changes or make big plans for changes, there ends up being a lot of fallout. What are the changes going to be to the documentation? What are the changes going to be to all of the localizations that we have for the countries around the world, the different languages that people speak? And so trying to get all of that work done can't always happen from one WWDC to the next, and we just have to expect that it'll be interrupted, and we have to put it on pause and then readjust our plans. But some years we get very lucky. The changes at WWDC are more, I think we've talked in the show before when we had sort of third-party developers come on and react to announcements at WWDC, that some years we have a lot of homework, where we have a lot of work we have to kind of figure out and do. Other years we have a year of gifts where Apple just says, oh, well, now here are some features that if you've been using our recommended techniques over the past few years, you get this other stuff now for free as well, or almost free. Maybe, you'll have to rebuild and maybe turn on some extra targets. And this year we have a mix of both.
Yeah.
Where there's certainly a lot of homework coming up with thinking about how liquid glass affects all of our app designs. But we also receive, gifts might be the wrong word to use, because gifts imply that somebody just gave you something and it wasn't really based on what you have done. So maybe a better word in this case would be dividends, where, gifts are nice to have, but dividends are things that you earned by making investments earlier in time. And so over the past 5 years, we've made some big investments in things like updating our apps to use Swift UI. And that took some extra time on our part to move away from AppKit and UIKit and to use Swift UI. But now, as a result, it becomes much easier to reuse that Swift UI code in more places as Apple extends like widgets to more devices, CarPlay, Vision OS, and so on. And as we just see Apple move the platform forward and support things like liquid glass, the mechanics of that adoption are a lot easier when you're using Swift UI, which has easy layout kind of accommodations for that, than if you're trying to lay it out the old ways with, there are lots of old ways. I guess we can talk about the many ways that you've laid out software on AppKit, from the original springs and struts to, auto layout to and down the line. So,
yeah, it's many times over the years, there will be things in WWDCs that you realize, like you said, dividend's a perfect word for it, that pay off later on, right? The years like, hey, maybe your app should know about different screen sizes. Like, Apple, you have only ever shipped 2 screen, then suddenly there's bigger phones, right? It's like, that is a side effect of Apple working, of course, years in advance. A lot of these things take a long time, and they're evolving as Apple itself works through them. And a lot of developers I've spoken to, particularly this summer, have said the same thing. Like, if you have been moving along with Apple as Swift and Swift UI have evolved and matured. And if you've paid attention to these other things, you are set up for not necessarily that it's easy, it's not the flip of a switch, but an easier time preparing for Liquid Glass and this new user interface than if your head's kind of been in the sand for the last 3, 4, 5 years. And that's hard with a big application, I'm sure. I mean, you mentioned some of these apps have, I'm sure, parts of them that have been around for a long time, but it's something you've got to do. So when these big changes come, you can be ready.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and sometimes the reason Apple is asking you to do something, well, as you mentioned, are not at all obvious. And sometimes when you look back, it becomes more obvious in retrospect, whether it's, like the windows that can be resized now on the iPad, or whether it's, I remember when Apple brought Safari to the iPhone, it suddenly became much more clear why over the past few years, they had been prioritizing the performance of Safari over the correctness of Safari. Because, we'd been wondering, why are you not fixing this bug? Or, you're intentionally doing something in kind of a way that's not as compatible with websites. Isn't compatibility with websites the most important thing for a web browser to do? And the answer is, of course, yes, it is if you're just looking at the web browser on the Mac. But if you're looking at the web browser on a phone where you have hardly any processing power available, relatively speaking, and your whole goal is just to get something on there at all, now it becomes a lot more clear why, okay, yeah, we're willing to make some sacrifices for speed, even if it means now we're breaking some things that people had come to expect on the web. And so we see those as kind of moves happen on the platform in other areas just over the years. Some of the things that were being done on the platforms became more obvious when the Vision Pro shipped. And I'm sure some of the moves we're looking at this year will become more obvious in another year or two down the road when other things ship that we just don't know anything about right now.
Well, I mean, you guys kind of famously were one of the first kind of battleship apps to take on Swift UI. And that was not an easy task. I think you've kind of said publicly that took longer than you wanted and it was a lot more work. But ultimately, now are you feeling good about that?
Yeah, it certainly has left us in a good place for this year, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Changes like we're doing. And we did get some benefits out of it sooner than this year with easier cross-platform sharing of like our inspector code and so on. But yeah, it was definitely a process that took longer than we originally anticipated. And we had to wait for Apple to make some changes before it was practical to ship.
Now, this year we got Liquid Glass. What do you think of it?
Well, that is a landmine, isn't it? There are a lot of I've read a lot of opinions out there about overall. I think it is beautiful. So I think, and that is something that I feel like we were sort of missing from the iOS 7 transition on, where things just got so Spartan that we had lost some of that beauty in the platform. There's certainly some struggles yet with legibility and so on. But I'm not sure. I feel like some of those struggles are overplayed or kind of taking its use out of context, maybe not where Apple intends it to be used, or maybe not thinking about how users will actually be using it. So for sure, if you overuse Liquid Glass, you're going to have some big problems with legibility. And so we're trying to be careful about that as we think about where do we use Liquid Glass in our apps. Apple's recommendations are not that you use it for that you use it everywhere, that you're supposed to try to use it on things that are maybe floating over your main content, and there shouldn't be very many of those, right? And so it makes sense if you look at OmniFocus, for example, on the iPhone. We have a couple floating buttons that represent opening something quickly. Our quick open button and our quick entry buttons. Both of those seem like great candidates for Liquid Glass. You don't have to worry too much about are they legible or not. The stuff behind doesn't need to be legible. It used to be completely hidden. The stuff in front, you know what those two functions are. You're scrolling it, you're going to always see it. So nothing is changing about that. So it makes sense where the interface is otherwise stable, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at. If you're overusing it and you're putting it on controls that are changing all the time, and now you're trying to decipher those controls every time you look at your screen, but your screen is harder to decipher because of the liquid glass effect being there, then that seems like that is one of the ways that people get frustrated with what's happening with it. Another thing that I really like about the liquid glass look is that we're finally starting to see a return to better indications of where controls actually begin and end. Like I can tell where the edge of a button actually is instead of just wondering in the iOS 7 button world. Well, if I tap here, is that going to actually activate that symbol or not?
Yeah.
On the Mac, the same thing was true with with recent bringing that kind of iOS 7 aesthetic over to the Mac.
I've been hearing from listeners and Labs members saying, "Well, is it just like, are we just going to Windows Vista on the Mac?" And I think that you have to use it to appreciate, because it's not that. It's not. Windows Vista was it was without editing, the way they did it. This is much more subtle. And I think the thing that keeps coming to me, having spent time now in the betas, is kind of whimsy and delight in the operating system again. And that's the words that come to me. It's not that it feels modern, but it feels a little more whimsical and joyful. And when I go to, my old system that Stephen won't let me update, it feels old and creaky and not as joyful and not as whimsical. So I feel like they're onto something.
Yeah. And Ken, I think you're exactly right. I mean, in my exploration of it is best done, I don't want to say sparingly, but especially that clear glass control, like over buttons or things, you can overdo it. And I think a lot of developers, like as we speak over the summer, are learning that just in their own exploration of like, oh, if you glassify everything, it's just a mess. But looking through Apple's first-party apps on the iPhone and iPad in particular, I think you can get a good feel for what Apple has in mind here. And there are clearly cases where it really shines, where you've got content behind it. Like Maps and Photos are two of my favorite examples of it on the iPhone, of like, there's this big map, full bleed edge to edge, or my photos are edge to edge as they scroll underneath these buttons, and the light refracts and reflects within the buttons. And it is really beautiful when done correctly. And it will be,
Right.
It'll be exciting this fall as app updates roll out to see where everybody landed. And I really think just like iOS 7, there will be a period where people figure that out. And maybe we see some apps get updated again, where they dial it back or they tune it with feedback from their users. It'll be a process, but I think seeing Apple's first-party apps is a really good example of kind of where it's effective and where it works.
Yeah, I agree. And then bringing the fun back, as David said, is, I think, an important element that it helps people connect with their devices when the devices have some whimsy and some just aesthetic appeal.
Which is funny because at the same time, I feel like, and you as an old NeXT and Mac guy can appreciate this, I feel like a lot of the whimsy in the operating system is kind of slowly being pulled out. I mean, people were writing me about the Mickey Mouse hand going away and things like that. They are flattening the whimsy on one level, but at the same time bringing it back with this liquid glass.
It also really helps, from my point of view as a developer who makes software that runs across all of these platforms, to have controls that look more like each other across the different platforms.
Yeah.
I mean, they're still not identical or anything, but they're certainly closer than they had been without losing all of their character, which is kind of what I felt like was happening when the iOS 7 look was coming to the Mac.
And it's funny because everybody says this is based on Vision OS, but Vision OS feels like an outlier among all of them.
Yeah, I'm not sure I see the, I mean, obviously there's some transparency that is involved in Vision OS, but it, I wouldn't call it based on.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, it's impressive that they did all these platforms in 1 year, and I hope that helps you get kind of a unified look for everything. What is your most delightful bit of all the new stuff that came out this year that makes you smile?
Oh, interesting. I think. Well, so we talked about liquid glass. I certainly enjoyed that piece, but another piece that's really kind of behind the scenes, and we're not going to feel the effects for. Well, I guess we'll see how soon we feel the effects because it's partially up to developers. Is Apple opening up their AI story with the foundation models?
Yeah.
And in other ways, right? Like they're not just with the foundation models, but with Xcode now, not only talking to Apple's models, but in fact, not talking at all to their own models, and now they're just talking to third-party models or your own local models and so on. That Apple, I think, is at its best when it is busy shepherding the platform and not trying to promote just a single solution that they are the only provider for, right?
Yeah.
And so when there's no need for Apple to be the best AI developer on the platform as long as all of the best AI developers want to be on their platform.
That's the trick, right? AI needs to be a commodity for Apple to succeed with this.
Yeah, and Apple makes great hardware and a great operating system, and so already all of those players are on their platform, and so it's great to see Apple maybe start to recognize that they don't have to play it alone anymore, that they can just help shepherd the ecosystem in the right direction. So with the foundation models, for example, we now see, it took very little time, like within within a day of experimentation, I had added support to Omni automation plugins to be able to talk to the local foundation models and ask questions like, okay, well, can you tell me, can you generate a list of steps that I would need to install solar panels on my home? And then it would spit back some OPML or whatever. And then you could say, okay, now import this into OmniFocus. And now you've got a project that's built just from asking a query and of this plugin and having it insert the tasks.
That's got to be one of the challenges for you. Is like, now that you have the ability, it's like, where do you actually use it in your productivity suite? Like, where does AI even make sense for your users?
Right. And a lot of users have a lot of ideas for where it makes sense, and they've sent a lot of great suggestions already. And of course, we're going to think about some of the ideas they've proposed and what ought to be built in. But at the same time, I really want to be cautious. I know some of our users would rather not have AI infect their apps, is kind of how they feel about it, or infect their data. And so I want it to be under their control at all times, and for them to decide where it makes sense for them or not, and where they want to leverage it or not. And so that's one of the places where being able to build it into the plugin system is so powerful, because now you can install a plugin that does this thing if you want to use it. And if you don't want to use it, you just leave that out.
I have to admit, calendars and tasks are like a hard line for me with AI, where I just don't want it helping. I think I need to be the person who decides what I'm going to do and when I'm going to do it ultimately. And maybe someday I'll be convinced otherwise, but every experiment I've made with AI on those fronts has convinced me that I'm better at it, and I need to take responsibility for it myself. But that's maybe I'm sounding old and cranky now. I don't know.
Well, to me, you're sounding like an expert in those topics. And much like I don't feel like I want the AIs to be programming my software, because every time I look at what kind of code they generate, it seems like, why would you do it that way? That's a terrible idea, right?
Yeah, that's actually a question, because like, you are one of the most experienced programmers on the platform between your NeXT and your Apple experience. And now we've got AI writing code for people. There's this whole vibe coding movement where people who don't even know how to program are making their own apps. And have you like dipped your toes into that? And like, what's your feelings about it as someone who is really one of the foremost experts in this platform?
So while I think I'm an expert in this platform, I'm not an expert in AI stuff. And that's partially because of my bias against running anything else on other people's computers and feeding them data.
Yeah.
So all of my AI explorations are things that involve local models that I've run on my local systems. And I know that the local models are not as advanced, as competitive as some of the models now that are that the commercial folks are selling, right? So I don't have experience with those models necessarily, although I've certainly watch other people's experience and the sorts of things they ask and how they shepherd things through. My feeling is that the AI stuff is a really great way to get going when you're maybe not the expert, right? And you need some help to figure out what to do next. Or maybe you are the expert and you just feel like the whole process of coding is tedious and you want it to do all the tedium, and then you're going to review it later, right? And you feel like you can be comfortable doing that. There are certainly places where I guess I feel like it's useful, and there's no reason to back away from it just because it's AI. From a pragmatic, I'm trying to get things done point of view. There's also still the question of how these things are trained. There are a bunch of ethical questions that are involved as well.
Yeah.
I think it is possible to train this stuff ethically. I don't know that everything that is available has been trained ethically, though, or I'm sure a lot of it is not. And so there's that issue as well. But I think ultimately, much like compilers made it much easier for people to write code, and better programming languages help people write code better. When I say write code better, I guess I mean make them more productive at building code, building applications that they weren't otherwise building. We don't see people building like OmniFocus scale products just using assembly code. But any assembly language programmer might look at the output of a compiler and say, "Oh, I know I could do that part of it better." Right?
Yeah.
And I think that some of that same stuff applies now to what we're seeing with AI code and so on. And as a result, we're going to see some of the same sorts of issues crop up that we saw crop up with programming languages, where a lot of the security holes that we have had over the last few decades have had to do with how the C programming language thinks about strings and data, right? And allocating and freeing that memory and whether it's being used appropriately. When you switch to better programming language, you can kind of eliminate some of those issues and you have fewer bugs, right? If you switch to Rust or something. And now I think as people are building vibe coding up websites, they're going to be creating websites that have security holes, that have all kinds of things. They're going to accomplish things that they weren't able to accomplish before. But those things might have a lot of bugs. I guess is kind of where I'm going.
Yeah. I think that's a fair summary.
But you might get a lot of stuff done, particularly for like one-off tasks where you're not concerned so much with the tool that you use to create the output as with the ultimate output. Then, if you consider the AI process to be part of the tool set that you're using to create it, you do your one-time thing. Maybe you're making. To go back to my example from earlier, you're asking it, what are the steps to do add solar panels to my house? Yeah. Is it going to get all those steps correct or not? I have no idea. I'm not the expert. But as you get into that list, how serious is it if you've got it wrong? Maybe not that terrible, because as you go through it, you'll realize, oh, they left out a step, or no, that's redundant, or no, I just don't care. Like you're self-editing as you process that result.
Yeah, and obviously it's all a moving target. These things are getting better very fast.
Right.
And I was talking to a friend who does development. He said he's using it as a kind of a prototyping tool. Like I have an idea. Let me vibe code up something. This guy's a programmer, just to see if it's even a good idea. And if it, if the vibe code version seems like a tenable idea, then I'll go through and actually make it properly. And I thought that was an interesting use.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know people are also using it in the other direction, where they're not generating code with it. They're using it to help understand code that is already there. And so they'll ask questions about it. Again, I don't know that it always gets those answers right.
Yeah.
But maybe it helps you kind of start to find your way around the code base, and then you get more of the answers yourself.
Last question on AI. Apple makes private cloud compute available to users via shortcuts, but not to developers, if I understand that correctly. So are you able to address PCC now in app, or is that something that users have to do directly via shortcuts?
So my understanding is that the APIs we have there are just for accessing the foundation model that runs on your local device. And so far, that's been okay for these kinds of examples that I'm throwing at it, but I'm sure that it can't do as rich things as if we could use private cloud compute.
Yeah, and it's pretty good. I mean, it's not competitive with the OpenAI, but I feel like for a lot of the stuff I do, it's good enough. That's actually been for me maybe the big saving grace of Apple Intelligence this year is access to PCC. I've had a lot of fun accessing it and building it into shortcuts. So I'm sure I'll be doing that eventually with my OmniFocus shortcuts too.
Well, and there's some things that another good example, I guess, speaking of that some people have suggested is, well, could you use a shortcut that would automatically suggest tags to use from your OmniFocus database based on what you entered in as a title? And there is something where you'll immediately see if it got it right or wrong. It's just a suggestion. It's easy to edit and correct. The cost of being wrong is not that terrible. And so the potential savings is maybe useful.
Ken, we always like to wind up these shows talking to our guests about some of their favorite apps and services and things they use that folks listening may be interested in. Tell us some of the apps and services that bring you joy and delight.
Sure. So, as I was thinking about this question a bit, a lot of my life just revolves around the tools that come with the system, and terminal and long history kind of around all of that. But there are a number of tools that I tend to use pretty frequently. They're, that if I look right now, they're most likely open in my dock, probably on multiple devices. And so I thought that was worth calling out, I guess. So one is that I tend to use self-hosted. You may have already gotten this from my earlier conversations, but things that where I'm not sending my data to other people's devices. I do that both because I know that I can manage my devices and data, and if something goes offline, I've still got it all. And just, I don't know, there's a feeling of security knowing that the data is all under my control. And so,
and let's face it, at heart, you're still a Unix warrior. You're still back in the lab running that NeXT machine, right?
I've been self-hosting my email since 1985.
Yeah, so, I totally believe that. Yeah.
So for passwords, for example, I'll use the Strongbox app, which I can't remember what there's actually a standard that data file format that they use for those passwords that is shared with some other apps as well. And it's just one of the apps that works with that standard format that feels like it's really well integrated on Apple's devices. It's on my phone, it's on my laptop, it's on, I can basically have it everywhere. It can sync its data through iCloud. It uses Face ID or Touch ID to unlock and things like that. And so it's good integration, but keeps all my passwords and keeps track of them.
Yeah.
That's, I guess, all I have to say there. For music, kind of the same sort of thing. I used to use iTunes Music. That's where I have bought and still buy, I guess, most of the music that I didn't own previously already from CDs and so on. But I never liked storing my stuff on other people's clouds, so I have it on my, all of that data stored on my Synology server at home, and then it's managed through a third-party open source thing called Jellyfin, and then another open source app for the front end for Apple devices is called FinApp that connects to those and plays that music back. And that lets me download the music and have it offline, and so I can have it on my phone even if I'm on a road trip somewhere with no data signal or something.
Yeah, I mean that's I've almost everybody's just gone to Apple Music at this point, or what's the bigger competitor?
Spotify.
That's interesting that you're doing it yourself. I kind of love that.
Well, it's I guess it's kind of my MO. I know it's a little bit off the beaten path, but it's still.
But you're a music lover, so I imagine you've got a big library. So you having it all self-hosted, it gives you a lot of control, I'm sure.
Yeah. Then for another app that I use quite frequently is for social media, connecting to all of the other developers in the community. Well, not all of them, but many other developers in the community and so on. Mostly on the Mastodon platform, and then the front end that I use for Mastodon is Tapbot's Ivory app. And I've been using Tapbots for. I was using their Tweetbot before Twitter cut that off, and then when Twitter cut that off, I found that mostly cut off my usage of Twitter just because that was how I interfaced with Twitter. And if it's no longer there, then I'm no longer there.
That's one of the best Twitter client pivots, right? Chatbots. Because they had a great app, and they've done a great job of just kind of staying relevant, getting into Mastodon and other platforms. Good for them.
Yeah. I appreciate the work they've done. For sound, both for kind of capturing and manipulating audio, Rogue Amoeba makes great apps. So they have, of course, Audio Hijack, which I'm using to record my end of this podcast right now.
Yep.
And they also make Fission, which is a great tool for editing the audio afterward, and doing things with it. It's sort of relatively lightweight. I'll use that to, cut off stuff from the beginning of a music piece maybe that I've recorded, and then stuff at the end. We were doing that when we were when I was rehearsing with James Dempsey for the James Dempsey and the Breakpoints performance at WWDC. I took some of the previous recordings and used Vision to edit them into a little playlist that then I could load onto my phone in Finamp and then just listen to make sure I had all of the transitions right in my head.
These apps, these Rogue Amoeba apps come up all the time, especially when talking to podcasters, because this is kind of our lifeblood of keeping things going. But we hear from so many listeners that are not podcasters that have found uses for Rogue Amoeba software. Rogue Amoeba, I don't know where we'd be without them in terms of the audio situation on the Mac. I guess we'd all be using overblown heavy tools, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I appreciate how their dedication to that audience for decades now, really.
Yeah.
And then the last two things that I'm going to list here are actually kind of corner apps made by sort of design developers that that we use to like help figure out things that we're trying to do when we're designing an app. And so Clarko makes this app called Simplesaurus for exploring the SF symbol library, and he's gone through and categorized, like he's gone through and audited a whole lot of apps, both built-in apps and third-party apps, and looked at the symbols and then looked at how they were being used. And okay, well, here are all of the symbols that have been used for pause or play or stop or whatever, these different things. And so when you go, you can search for either the symbol name directly, but you can kind of do that in any SF symbol browser, or you can search for how it's been used. And it's nice to, maybe help us all as a community develop a common design language for this symbol means this thing.
Yeah, this is great. I just downloaded it. SF symbols are so useful, and it is hard to navigate though because there's just so many.
And he has it available on, I think, pretty much every Apple platform.
Nice.
And then Harley Thomas makes this app for exploring Swift UI controls and layouts on different platforms. It's called Interactful. And so, sometimes when I'm thinking, okay, well, I remember seeing this control used in an app or in a place, but I don't remember what it's called. It's a way I can kind of browse through the controls and see what it looks like, and see what it looks like on different platforms. So I can open it up on my Mac, but then I can open up the same app and look at the same sort of controls and interactions on my iPhone or my iPad or on the Apple Vision Pro. And, all of those sometimes have subtly different ways, particularly prior to OS 26, the subtly different ways of looking at how they might present pop-ups and things. So it's just a useful tool to kind of help remind me, okay, how does this selector look on this platform?
What I love about both of these apps is that they're by developers for developers, but and designers both. These are just tools from people who want Apple's ecosystem to be better, like very clearly built out of love for these platforms. And I think it's so cool that they exist.
Yeah, me too.
Well, Ken, where should people go if they want to check in on what you're up to?
Sure. So as I just mentioned, for social media, I tend to be on Mastodon more than anywhere else because that is where Ivory exists, where chatbots move their device. So you'll find me at kcase@mastodon.social. You can also send me email, of course. That's been the longest lived social media option for. My email address has been the same now for 34 years, I guess, since we're coming up on 34 years later this year. So it's KC, my initials, at omnigroup.com.
Well, I am just so pleased that many years ago you decided to take a shot at the NeXT platform that led to so many decisions that give me these great applications on my Mac. And I appreciate what you do at the Omni Group. I know a lot of our listeners are avid users of your software, and I love the amount of detail and attention you bring to your apps. And thank you for sharing the story with us today and all the great work you do over there at the Omni Group.
Oh, well, thank you. And of course, it's not just me there. We've got a great team. And I'm proud of.
Yeah. I mean, that just, I am a fan of you and your company, but just like having the opportunity to visit you back in the day at your offices, it's like every room had another man or woman in it that is just dripping with competence of app development and design and all the great stuff you do. You really have a great team. So we'll put the links to all that in the show notes. We are the Mac Power Users. You can find us at relay.fm/MPU. If you'd like to join and become a member, you can do that also at relay.fm/MPU. That gets you the ad-free extended version of the show. Today, we're going to be talking to Ken about software transitions. Thank you to our sponsors, 1Password and Squarespace, and we'll see you next time.